All right, we are joined by Phil Yates, an NFL insider for ESPN. Phil, how's it going?
Hey, I'm doing great. Appreciate you having me on, and glad that we're in the throes of football season. And we've got a couple of hurdles along the way, but it's great to be in the midst of the best time of the year.
Yeah, it's great to be talking to you. And I don't know if you remember this, about 4 years ago, maybe even a little bit longer than that. I had you on a podcast that I was doing at the time. And man, your career has really taken off since then. So, one, I guess I'd just like to say you're welcome for all that I did for you. And then, two, it's nice to be able to talk with you again. I've restrained myself from being creepy and sliding into your DMs, so it's good really to have the opportunity face to face to talk here over
Well,
video, of course.
that's right. Well, of course, and back to you, by the way. I mean, who would have thought? Where was the Action Network in like the planning process and like the growth 4 years ago? Right? Like it's amazing how far things have come for both of us. So good to catch you up, and good to see you continuing to do what you do, which is turn out great content.
All right, let's get talking about the trade deadline, which it feels like is rapidly approaching for the NFL. And big picture question: we've recently had Ryan Fitzpatrick benched with the Miami Dolphins. I'm a Cowboys fan. I would love the idea of the Cowboys trading for Ryan Fitzpatrick. Who knows if that actually happens? But Ryan Fitzpatrick, what do you see happening with him on the trade market?
So unless somebody blows the Dolphins out of the water with a great offer, and that would have to be like a day two pick in the draft, I would think. I can't imagine he gets dealt. And part of the reason I say that is that, I mean, first of all, it's hard to find a perfect suitor. As disappointed as I'm sure you are, and many Cowboys fans are, after Andy Dalton's debut, the team invested $3 million guaranteeing him. They feel like he's got a good grasp of the system at the very least. It's going to go, has other places to go, but most likely will go up from where it was this past Monday night. And then, as much as Fitzpatrick was disappointed in the decision this past week, this is part of the reason why the Dolphins have valued him. He's a quarterback tutor who also can be a starting quarterback. So he may be frustrated and he may be upset and he may be heartbroken, which, by the way, are all human reactions to what happened when you get benched after leading your team to 3 wins in 6 games. The Dolphins still value his ability in a tutor role to Tua enough that I don't foresee a trade happening unless, again, I'm talking about a deal that, to lean on a cliche, is quite literally too good to refuse.
Yeah. All right, let's go from Miami to New York, where Sam Darnold has, I mean, I feel like he's just been embroiled in horrible circumstances, beyond his control. But there are, whispers potentially that maybe the Jets feel as if it's best to end the Darnold era. I don't really see that happening, but do you think that's something that could happen?
Yeah, I don't. And here's the reason why. If you're doing that, obviously that puts you in the market for a quarterback next year. And as we all know, in the 2021 draft class, and I guess the evaluation can change from late October to late April, but we see one player who stands well above the rest, and that's Trevor Lawrence. And as much as a lot of teams would love Trevor Lawrence, he's only going to end up with one franchise. So the Jets could trade Sam Darnold. Obviously, they would turn the keys over to Joe Flacco for the rest of the season. But the more important thing is you got to find a way to lose your way to the top in this case. And it may sound on paper like a good idea. Let's say you could get a second-round pick for Sam Darnold, who still has the remainder of this year plus next year, and a fifth-year option if a team exercises it on his rookie contract. If you get Sam Darnold, or if you give Sam Darnold away, and then you wind up with the third pick in the draft, which might only take 2 wins this year, then you're not getting Trevor Lawrence, and you're still going to get a really nice prospect, whether it's a quarterback or another top-tier player. But still, I think the reason why you'd move off of Sam Darnold is because there is one player that feels like he is a surefire bet to be better than Sam Darnold in better circumstances, because your point is well taken. Sam Darnold has been playing with bad wide receivers, bad offensive line, in a lot of ways a bad system for his entire career. There's only one guy, though, that could be a decided clear upgrade, and that's Trevor Lawrence. And you're not guaranteed to get him unless you finish with the first pick in the draft.
All right, let's talk about Dwayne Haskins, who I think is in kind of a similar situation to Sam Darnold, although it seems as if he might be worse. And it seems like absolutely no loyalty from the coaching staff to Haskins, and there are reports that they have already, pursued the possibility of trading him. Do you think that he will be dealt? Are there teams out there that would be interested in Dwayne Haskins?
So I'm not counting it out. That being said, if he's traded away, I expect this to be a sell low because it's hard to imagine anybody values Dwayne Haskins at a very high level right now for a few reasons. One, as you said, he's been benched. His play was, I would say, up and down. There were a few bright moments, but obviously this is a player. It's not like this was Kyler Murray or one of these quarterbacks that recently came into the league and from day one, the week one, day one starter, became this instant superstar or close to instant superstar. So I think that beyond the up and down play, he was a guy that coming into the draft, there was a consensus, right? If you go back and look at the draft over the past like 10 or 15 years, the sweet spot for top quarterbacks is actually like the exact opposite of where he goes. Like usually we see guys well gone by the time, or long gone, I should say, by the time we get to pick 15, which is where Dwayne Haskins was taken, right? You normally see if a quarterback's the real deal, you usually see guys go in the first 7 to 10 picks. And then if the league is like not so certain, it ends up closer to like the 25 to 32 range. And instead, you had a player in Dwayne Haskins that went right in the middle of the first round. It felt like he sort of just fell into Washington's lap, but there were teams behind Washington that could have used a quarterback prospect that probably wouldn't have had to pay such a precipitous price to go up the draft board. So anyways, I mentioned that because I don't think his value league-wide is particularly robust. I think if he is traded, it'll be for a very modest price package, maybe for a day 3 pick or 2. I can't imagine he gets something like a third or second round pick. I just can't see it.
All right, let's talk about Le'Veon Bell, who was recently traded to the Chiefs. Not really thinking about the short term, but more of the longer term for this season. How do you see him fitting into the Chiefs' plans, in December, January, potentially a Super Bowl?
Yeah, I think it's actually a better question framed that way than right away. Most people are like, how much are we going to see from Le'Veon in this first week or two with the Chiefs? I'm not entirely sure, and I don't even know if the Chiefs know. But I think the idea of this acquisition is there may come a time in December or January where we need either a little bit of extra work because Clyde Edwards-Helaire, who has been great, but still, he's a rookie who I understand that LSU played 15 games last year, but still, the rigors of the NFL are different than the rigors of playing at LSU. It's a longer season. You could potentially be playing for 19 or 20 weeks. And Le'Veon adds something that I don't know that they have in their backs behind Clyde Edwards-Helaire. He's a better pass catcher, probably a little bit more versatile than Darrell Williams and Darwin Thompson. And I don't view the move to acquire Le'Veon as an indictment of Clyde Edwards-Helaire. I think I look at it more as a team in the Chiefs in a position to be opportunistic, being opportunistic because it's not like it cost them a ton. I mean, the contract is incredibly team friendly. And this is a player that probably could have gone to a few different spots and chose the Chiefs. He wants to be there. He understands that he's going to have to play by their rules as opposed to expecting them to build the offense around him.
I'm interested in a couple of wide receivers with the Bengals, AJ Green and John Ross. AJ Green is in a franchise season. It seems as if this is likely to be his last year with the Bengals. John Ross has already openly requested a trade. Do you see anything happening with either of those players?
I could see John Ross being on the move because you're right. I mean, he's the odd man out. The issue with AJ Green, I think, is pretty straightforward. It's just not worth the price tag, right? I mean, he's making so much more. I believe the franchise tag value for him, which was different than other wide receivers, was $18.5 million or in that range. So if you're acquiring close to half a season of AJ Green, you're still talking about a $9 million commitment for a guy who prior to week 6 had been, just brutal. And he's 31 years old. You're acquiring him. Are you giving up a draft pick for a player that might only be on your roster for half a season? If you sign him after this year, are you comfortable paying a 31, soon to be 32-year-old wide receiver who certainly from an athletic standpoint is not quite what he was? I think that AJ Green stays in Cincy. I think John Ross, though, if I'm the Bengals, I'm at least, looking for some lines out there, throwing some lines out there because I don't expect them to get a huge return for a player that was once a first-round pick, but if you can at least get some sort of usable asset. I think as easy as the Jets are to target for what they have done this year, we've seen them recently start to offload players. And even if what they're doing is offloading players for third day picks, fifth, sixth, seventh rounders, like I'd rather those. I'd rather extra shots at young athletes in the draft than guys who aren't going to be with me going forward.
All right, so those are some of the guys I'm interested in. What matters a little bit more, who are the guys you are hearing rumors about?
I think that the names that are well, here's what I'd say. Um, I wouldn't be surprised if some of the trade deadline action, let's start here, picks up a little bit more prior to the deadline. Usually it's like we're waiting with bated breath until 3:59:59 on Tuesday. I believe it's the Tuesday after Halloween every year that the trade deadline is. So this year it's November 3rd. It's election day. So usually we are keeping an eye up until the very last moment. I think this year it might be that we see some action, as we did with the Yannick Ngakoue trade, that happens sooner than the trade deadline. Because again, not just the fact that teams are motivated, also that teams right now you're gonna have to pass a COVID protocol. It's gonna be 5 or 6 days before you can get traded and join in with your team. So let me start with a couple of teams now that we've established sort of the baseline. I think Atlanta's interesting. And I don't know. I don't believe Matt Ryan. Not entirely sure on Julio Jones, but the Falcons are an interesting roster given that they're, they have struggled out of the gates with the 0-5 start, fire your head coach, fire a general manager. You may not be tearing it down this offseason, but if you've got guys that are a year away or a year or two away from free agency, they should be on the table if I'm the Atlanta Falcons. Same thing goes for the Jets. We talked about them already. So would Quinn Williams, for example, be a name to keep an eye on? I don't know, but it'd be a tough pill to swallow given you drafted him in the first round just last year. At the same time, if you're Joe Douglas, you've made it clear, I'm open for business on every single player on the roster. Evan Ingram is a name that's been speculated upon a little bit just because he really hasn't thrived so far in that offense. And it's not that he's not a talented player. It just feels like for whatever reason, whether it's the lack of practice, whether it's the way he's being utilized, you name it, he has not been a smooth transition player for them into this new offense under Jason Garrett. And I tend to believe he and David Njoku, another guy that I would say keep an eye on as well, are valued around the league as positive contracts if you were to acquire them, given what they are due for the rest of this year and also what they are due next year, which would be the fifth-year option for each of them. I think both of them are names that I think make some sense to at least keep an eye on.
All right, you mentioned there the Falcons, the Jets, and the Giants as teams that potentially might be looking to trade away some players. Which are the teams that you're thinking about that might actively be looking for pieces to acquire?
Well, I think we have to probably assess who we believe are the best teams in the NFL right now and teams that are more in for 2020. Because we saw the Ravens, who were, obviously, they acquired Yannick Ngakoue, a very opportunistic moment for them. So I think you'll see, I don't know if I call it an arms race, but it would make sense to see Baltimore, San Francisco, teams that either are really good or teams that are, potentially good, but need a little bit of reinforcements to push them over the top. San Francisco, I don't know that they are not cap flush per se, but an interesting team to keep an eye on just because they stumbled a little bit out of the gates and they're in a really competitive division. The Eagles are always interesting, and the Packers are a team that, the Packers have for a long time had a stigma of not being particularly active in free agency and then not necessarily a splash organization when it came to transactions. Well, that's changed recently as they have, made some trade deadline trades, such as HaHa Clinton Dix a couple of years ago. And this is a team that we've seen go a little more audacious in terms of its spending in free agency. So the Packers, Eagles, 49ers, I think the Vikings could be an offloading team, as I mentioned. So maybe within that division, probably can cross up them. But, the Ravens, the Bills might be an interesting team as well because they have some money to spend. They have had a really solid start, but there's probably room to improve there to be part of that AFC elite.
All right, I'd like to get your thoughts on why the NFL doesn't seem to have the same kind of flurry of trade deadline action that we typically see out of a sport like the NBA or the MLB.
I I think because probably that we view roles in NBA, MLB, NHL rosters as much more like, sort of uniform and specific. You're acquiring a guard or a forward in basketball. In baseball, it's like a second baseman's job is fairly straightforward, no matter who you're playing for. Whereas in football, every team values a certain type of offensive lineman. Some need powerful road graders. Some need athletic guys that can play as part of a zone running scheme. Some teams need long cornerbacks who've got a good physicality, like Seattle or Jacksonville or Atlanta. Some teams are looking for cornerbacks that have elite ball skills, and they'll sacrifice size for elite ball skills and speed. So I think that there's just a little bit less of a cookie cutter nature to each position. That probably is a driving force behind it. And then I think also some teams are just catching up. Like we've seen some organizations be super aggressive on the trade front. The Patriots, the Eagles, they always strike me as the two that are most open for business. The Ravens have been pretty aggressive in recent years. So I think other teams are going to catch up there. But I would say between the fact that there are more players on a roster and your salary cap is so much different, that and also roles, like I think teams have an easier time holding on to a player in the NFL than they do in the NBA, where, for example, like if you have a Kawhi Leonard who's unhappy in San Antonio, or Jimmy Butler who's unhappy in Chicago, and then Minnesota, and then Philadelphia, the time is ticking pretty quickly to move on, and the salary cap dictates that it may be good business for you, maybe not in the short term, but in the long term.
All right, Phil, this has been great. One more question here, and then I want to hear what you have to say about Sling TV. Kind of big picture question from a fantasy perspective. Who is one guy you would want to trade for right now in anticipation of any, quote unquote, real life transactions? A
Oh, okay.
fantasy acquisition, but keeping in mind potential trades that might happen in the NFL. So trying to get
Right.
ahead of that NFL action.
How about Austin Hooper? And here's the reason why, is that there have been some recent solid signs of life from Austin Hooper. He has been more productive over the past handful of weeks. Also, as I mentioned, David Njoku, there's been some conflicting information about whether he's, sort of asked for a second trade request or if he's just available. But if he moves on, not that the Browns offense has been, the most efficient operation, and not that they have heavily targeted Austin Hooper every single week, but he's come on strong of late. And if David Njoku is in fact traded, that would be one less tight end he's competing for targets with. And it's impossible to find tight ends in general. Then you compound that with, players like George Kittle already missing time, Zach Ertz going on IR, Dallas Goedert still on IR. There are very few reliable options at tight end, because you know why? There's never a lot of reliable options at tight end in fantasy football.
All right. Talk to me about everything good with Sling TV.
Well, it's an interesting time right now in the world, and everybody's looking for a little bit of value, right? And I think that's probably one of the most important things that people should know about Sling TV. Is this is one of the best values, if not the best value, to consume TV, live sports, and all of the media that you most care about. And specific to those of us that are football fans, not everybody has maybe a man cave with 6 TVs that they can watch all of the available games on at one time. But you can watch Red Zone through the NFL Network on Sling TV. And for anybody that spent an afternoon listening to Red Zone, you know that it's a rush. It's a wild ride that everybody enjoys. It is football nirvana for basically 6 hours on a Sunday afternoon. And Sling opens up that door for you. So appreciative of the opportunity to work with Sling. And for those that out there that are looking to consume even more football than they already have at their disposal right now, Sling is one of the best options.
All right, Phil, great stuff. Thanks for taking the time to talk with us.
No problem, Matt. Always good to catch up.
All right, be sure to follow Phil on Twitter at Field Yates.